This video focuses on the Daikin Altherma 3, the Daikin LAN adapter, which is solar enabled, and ultimately how we get excess solar to trigger domestic hot water heating in the Daikin unit. Three components we're going to have to look at. The first is the energy meter, the second is the LAN adapter itself, and then we'll take a look at the Daikin unit and talk a little bit around the settings that I've set to make all this work. So here's the pulse meter that I'm using. It's the ABB meter that I had to order. You see the model code along the side here, B21311-100. That's the one that I've gone for. It's got two pulse outputs. I got this in case I need the other output in the future or something else. I'll put a link to where I purchased this in the comments. I suppose just to briefly look at some of the settings that we've set. So I'm on pulse 1 here. We're obviously getting active export energy. That's what we're looking for. If we go down, the frequency is 100 pulses per kilowatt hour. If we come back again, you've got the length of the pulse. That's 200 milliseconds that I've set. And the output is obviously out to output 1 on the bottom of this device. That's kind of it. Nothing else you really need to set here. That's running on, I've just a basic 6-core cable. This needs to be done a little bit better, but it just runs in next door to the other room, into the plant room where the Daikin is located. So that's the pulse meter that you'll need to wire up just to get pulses back to the Solar Lan adapter. Okay, so looking at the Solar Lan adapter, again I'll put the model code up on the description. If I take off the cover, there's a couple of things going on here that we'll talk through. First of all, we have our X2A connector, this guy just in here. This is our pulse meter connection, so that's running back through to the meter that we just talked about a second ago. The P1 and P2 connector, that is going to run into the indoor unit. And then up on the top here we have our smart grid controls. Now you can see I'm just triggering SG0 and the neutral line as well. So I have those connected to a smart switch. So when solar excess is high enough that I want to use it for domestic hot water, I will trigger that switch, which will then enable the LAN adapter and communicate with the indoor unit that the excess is to be consumed for domestic hot water. The reason I have this switch in here in my case is I leave this turned off generally unless my batteries are full. So once the batteries in the attic are full, I'll put my inverter into a standby mode and then I'll continue to consume excess in domestic hot water. Some people can just wire this straight through and leave it as a closed circuit all of the time. But whatever you do is up to yourself. As you can see, I'm just using one of these sewn off switches. All my stuff is hooked back into Home Assistant, so that's running on either Zigbee or Z-Wave. Can't remember, it's in there so long. Okay, so that's the LAN adapter connectivity. Quite simple. A LAN cable, the P1, P2 connector into the indoor unit, the X2A connector to your pulse meter, and then your smart grid controls. It's explained very well in the manual, so I don't need to go through those again. Another point on the LAN adapter, if you connect to its IP address, you'll see it does have smart grid controls. I think the only one in here that really makes any difference is just the pulse count. Just make sure you've set that the same as your energy meter, 1,000 pulses per kilowatt hour. Just going back as well on something I mentioned earlier, if you look at the length of the pulses and the number of pulses and the amount that you're exporting, you might need to do a calculation and drop the pulse length, or they'll come in on top of each other. But that's only if you're exporting huge amounts of power back to the grid. I haven't had an issue with this, but worth pointing out. So onto the Daikin unit itself. I've put this into installer settings, so that's user profile 5678. And a couple of things that I've set, which I think kind of get you over the line with this, is the first is on your main zone, you need to make sure that your control is not set to leaving water. If you're set to leaving water control, the smart grid functions just don't work. Mentions that in the user manual, so you need to either be using an external room thermostat or one of the Daikin room thermostats. For me, I have a TADO system, so it's just an external room thermostat that's been used. That's the first setting. The second setting is under the installer settings, and if we look at the domestic hot water, let me get down the power consumption control. Power consumption control should be continuous. You can put in a kilowatt limit, and my limit is 20 kilowatts because I'm not actually trying to limit the power. I'm just getting the unit to recognize it's on. It has the ability to have power control enabled. Priority heater, yeah, I mean that's set to none, obviously. Those are the two main settings to get you up and running. There's nothing else I can think of that I needed to put in here. I'll give a look at some of my field settings just in case they help you to align with anything I've set. And while I show these on screen, I'll just talk to that power limit. So while I have the power limit set to 20 kilowatts, once the smart grid controls kick in, your excess solar will dictate the power limit of the unit. So if my pulse meter is saying I'm exporting 1.5 kilowatts to the grid, well then the power limit will be set dynamically on the unit to 1.5, and that's constantly being adjusted by the LAN adapter and solar control. So that's why you want to have that functionality enabled. If you have that functionality fundamentally disabled, it isn't going to work from what I've seen. So in quick summary, you need your energy meter installed into the fuse box. You need to bring that back to your Solar Lan adapter. You need to connect that P1, P2 back into the Daikin. You need the unit not to be set to leaving water control, and you need your energy consumption set. That's pretty much all I did. I have this running for about a year, and I've had no issues with it. If there are any questions or comments, put them into the comments and I'll come back to you. As I say, you have the field settings there as well, just in case there's something you want to look at a more granular level. Plenty of documentation online on how you can map those to their menu-based equivalents. Okay, hope this helps. Cheers.